Maria Alvarez, a determined Filipina air hostess, and Sheikh Khalid Al Noor, a powerful Dubai royal, crossed paths in a world of luxury and secrecy. But what began as chance encounters in the sky would spiral into a scandal that destroyed a dynasty and changed both their lives forever. Maria Alvarez spent most of her life moving between time zones, learning to sleep in short hours and smile on command. As a Filipina air hostess based in Dubai, she understood that the cabin was a stage where perfection was expected at all times. Her uniform was always pressed, her voice always calm, and her manners carefully measured. Passengers saw only confidence and grace, never the discipline it took to maintain that image day after day. Flying had once felt like freedom to her. Each destination promised escape from the limits of her childhood, where money was always short and choices were few. Her salary supported aging parents and younger siblings back home, making every flight more than just a job. It was a responsibility she carried silently, even during moments of exhaustion. Dubai, with its glass towers and gold-lined hotels, felt like a different universe. The city taught Maria how close luxury and loneliness could exist. She served royalty, celebrities, and powerful businessmen who treated flights as private lounges in the sky. Watching them, she learned how influence worked and how easily rules bent for those who mattered. Despite the glamour around her, Maria lived carefully. She avoided scandals, declined invitations, and kept her private life sealed off. Rumors traveled fast in the aviation world, and she knew one mistake could end everything she had built. Her dream was simple: save enough to leave flying behind and open a small business in Manila. Yet beneath her control was a quiet restlessness. Repeated nights above the clouds left her questioning how long she could live between departures and arrivals. She felt unseen as a person, valued only for her service and appearance. That hunger for recognition, for something more stable and meaningful, lingered in her mind. It was this unspoken longing that would later pull her toward a path she never imagined, one that would turn her carefully balanced life into a storm she could not escape. Sheikh Khalid Al Noor was a name spoken with caution and respect in Dubai's elite circles. His presence was felt long before he entered any room, carried by reputation rather than noise. Born into privilege and raised among influence, he represented a blend of tradition and modern power that few dared to question. His business empire stretched across real estate, shipping, and private investments, quietly shaping parts of the city's skyline. To the public, he appeared devoted to family and faith. Photographs showed him beside his wife and children at charitable events, opening hospitals and funding education programs. Media coverage praised his generosity, reinforcing the image of a man who balanced wealth with responsibility. In a city that admired success, he was often held up as an example of how power should look. Behind closed doors, his world followed different rhythms. His travel schedule was constant, and his flights were treated as extensions of his personal domain. Staff were selected carefully, and privacy was enforced through layers of intermediaries and unspoken rules. Those who worked near him learned quickly that discretion was more valuable than skill. Whispers followed him through airport lounges and luxury hotels, but they never became stories. Influence smoothed every surface. Complaints disappeared, records stayed sealed, and questions were quietly redirected. His name acted like a shield, protecting him from consequences others would face without hesitation. When Maria first became aware of him, it was not through rumors but through routine. He was simply another high-profile passenger, seated apart, surrounded by assistants who managed every detail. Yet something about his control over space and people stood out. He did not ask for attention, it arrived automatically. This contrast between his flawless public image and the invisible power he wielded fascinated her. She sensed that his life operated under a separate set of rules, one she could observe but never fully understand. At the time, she had no reason to believe those distant rules would ever cross into her own carefully guarded world. Their paths crossed often enough that familiarity began to replace formality. Long-haul flights created a strange sense of routine, and Maria noticed how his presence subtly shifted the atmosphere around him. Crew members adjusted their movements, supervisors paid closer attention, and silence followed him like a shadow. What began as professional observation slowly turned into awareness she could not fully explain. Small gestures marked the change. Requests were delivered indirectly, favors handled through assistance, and timing always felt deliberate. Maria understood that nothing in his world happened by accident. Each interaction carried an imbalance she sensed but did not challenge. Attention from someone so powerful felt both validating and dangerous, especially in an environment where hierarchy ruled everything. Outside the aircraft, carefully arranged encounters followed. The settings were private, chosen to avoid notice, and framed as harmless extensions of courtesy. Maria convinced herself that control remained in her hands, that she could step away whenever she wished. She believed boundaries were clear, even as they quietly shifted. The relationship moved forward without definition. It existed in fragments, moments separated by flights, secrecy, and long gaps of silence. Maria told no one. She understood that speaking would only invite scrutiny she could not survive. Instead, she carried the weight alone, balancing her duties in the air with a growing sense of unease on the ground. What troubled her most was how easily her life adjusted around his. Schedules changed without explanation, doors opened without effort, and obstacles vanished when his influence touched them. The power difference became impossible to ignore. Choices she thought were hers felt increasingly guided. Still, she remained. Part of her hoped the connection meant security, perhaps even protection in a city where she was always replaceable. Another part sensed the risk but chose silence over confrontation. In that silence, the relationship deepened into something unspoken and unstable. Maria could not see where it was leading, only that turning back felt harder with every passing day. The change in Maria's body came quietly at first. Disguised as exhaustion, she blamed on flying. Long shifts had always left her drained, but this fatigue lingered in a way she could not shake. Fevers appeared without warning, followed by nights of restless sleep and sudden weight loss. She told herself it was stress, the cost of a life spent between continents. When dizziness interrupted her work, she sought medical advice in a private clinic away from the airline's network. The tests took longer than expected. Each passing day filled her with unease she could not name. She avoided mirrors, avoided calls home, and focused only on completing flights without drawing attention. The diagnosis arrived without comfort. The doctor's expression told her everything before the words settled in her mind. The illness carried a weight far beyond its medical meaning. It threatened her career, her future, and the family that depended on her. The room felt smaller as reality closed in. Maria searched her memory with painful clarity. Every choice, every risk replayed in her thoughts. There was no confusion about the source. The realization cut deeper than fear, replacing it with a sharp sense of betrayal. She had trusted discretion to protect her, believing secrecy meant safety. Instead, silence had left her exposed. Shock slowly turned into controlled panic. She understood the implications in a society where reputation mattered more than truth. Disclosure could destroy her before the illness ever did. Treatment was possible, but acknowledgement was dangerous. Alone in her apartment, Maria faced the future she never imagined. Anger crept in where tears failed. She thought of how easily power had shielded one life while placing another at risk. That imbalance became impossible to ignore. For the first time, she questioned whether survival meant more than managing symptoms. It meant confronting the injustice that had placed her there. In that moment, fear gave way to something colder and more focused. The illness was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a reckoning she had not yet fully planned. Maria reached out quietly, choosing paths that avoided attention and left no records. She expected resistance, but not erasure. Messages went unanswered. Promises made through intermediaries dissolved into delays. What little acknowledgement she received carried no concern, only instructions to remain silent. The absence of responsibility felt deliberate, as if her existence had become an inconvenience to be managed. Soon, subtle pressure followed. Her flight schedule changed without explanation, reducing her hours and income. Medical coverage became complicated, approvals slow and uncertain. Friends at work grew distant, unsure whether to ask questions or protect themselves. It was clear that an invisible hand was reshaping her life, reminding her how replaceable she was. Maria realized the truth she had avoided. In this world, power did not argue or explain. It simply moved obstacles out of the way. She had believed that facts would matter, that health and evidence would force accountability. Instead, influence buried everything before it could surface. The sense of betrayal deepened when she learned how carefully her situation was being contained. Confidential files were locked away. Legal advice led only to warnings. Every door she approached closed softly but firmly, leaving no trace of refusal. It was not cruelty, it was efficiency. Isolation became her constant companion. She could not speak openly to her family without risking panic. She could not seek justice without risking disappearance. Even grief felt unsafe. Silence, once her protection, turned into a cage. As days passed, Maria stopped waiting for acknowledgement. She understood that apology or support would never come. The system was designed to protect one name at the expense of many lives beneath it. That realization stripped away her remaining hope. In its place grew clarity. If truth would not be allowed through official channels, it would have to find another way out. Maria accepted that she had been abandoned by fairness and law alike. From that moment, she no longer saw herself as a victim asking for mercy, but as someone forced to reclaim control in a world that had decided she did not matter. Maria withdrew from the world that had rejected her and turned inward with purpose. Emotion gave way to calculation. She knew that anger alone would destroy her faster than any illness. What she needed was patience, precision, and distance. Revenge, she understood, could not be loud or rushed. It had to move quietly, just like the power that had silenced her. She began by organizing everything she remembered. Dates, flights, locations, medical timelines, and subtle changes in her work schedule were written down and stored securely. Patterns emerged where chaos once lived. What felt overwhelming slowly became structured. Knowledge replaced fear. Maria educated herself relentlessly. She studied how scandals surfaced, how journalists verified claims, and how digital anonymity could be protected. Nights once filled with anxiety became sessions of research and planning. She learned which countries respected press freedom and which platforms could not be easily controlled by influence or wealth. Every step was designed to leave no visible trail. Devices were separated, identities compartmentalized, and backups hidden across locations. She assumed she was being watched, even when there was no proof. That assumption kept her careful and alert. What surprised her most was how calm she felt. Planning gave her control she had lost months earlier. The illness no longer defined her days. The injustice did. She was no longer reacting to events. She was shaping them. Maria accepted the risks without illusion. Exposure could cost her safety, freedom, or life. Yet silence promised the same outcome in slower form. Doing nothing meant accepting erasure. Acting meant reclaiming her voice, even if it remained anonymous. As the plan took form, she made one final decision. This would not be a personal attack driven by emotion. It would be factual, documented, and impossible to dismiss as rumor. Truth would be her weapon, and timing her shield. By the time she finished preparing, Maria no longer felt small. She felt invisible in the most powerful way. And invisibility, she knew, could be turned into impact when used with care. The first release of information did not arrive with drama or accusation. It appeared quietly in inboxes belonging to reporters known for handling sensitive investigations. The sender was anonymous, the tone neutral, and the content precise. Attached were timelines that aligned flights with medical records, travel logs matched against clinic visits, and financial movements that raised questions without making claims. At first, the material was treated with caution. Powerful names often attracted false stories, and editors were trained to doubt anything that seemed too calculated. Still, the level of detail was unsettling. Dates connected too cleanly. Locations overlapped too consistently. Nothing in the files appeared exaggerated or emotional. They read like evidence, not revenge. Follow-up messages arrived days later, each expanding the picture without repeating earlier points. New documents supported the previous ones, filling gaps and answering unspoken questions. The sender never demanded publication. There were no threats, no pleas, no attempt to control the narrative. That restraint made the material harder to dismiss. Journalists began independent verification. Airline schedules confirmed movements. Medical experts reviewed anonymized data and confirmed plausibility. Financial analysts flagged transactions that suggested quiet settlements and deliberate containment. Slowly, skepticism shifted into concern. What troubled editors most was the pattern of silence surrounding the central figure. Attempts to request comment were redirected or ignored. Legal warnings arrived before questions were fully formed, reinforcing the sense that something was being protected. As pieces came together, the story changed shape. It was no longer about rumor or morality. It became about power, health, and concealment. The illness, once hidden behind influence, now stood at the center of an international investigation. The leak did not explode immediately. It spread carefully, shared between trusted desks across borders. Each outlet waited, aware that once published, the consequences would be irreversible. Somewhere behind the anonymity, Maria watched the process unfold, knowing the first crack had finally appeared in a wall built to never break. The effects of the leak reached the Sheikh's household before the public ever saw a headline. Advisors grew tense, schedules tightened, and familiar routines shifted without explanation. Calls were taken behind closed doors, and meetings stretched late into the night. The family sensed that something beyond ordinary business trouble was unfolding, even if no one explained what it was. His wife noticed the change first. Public appearances were canceled, and charity events were postponed indefinitely. Staff members avoided eye contact, moving through the home with careful silence. Questions were met with reassurance that sounded rehearsed and incomplete. The stability she had trusted began to feel fragile. Within days, business partners started to withdraw quietly. Invitations stopped arriving. Long-standing associates delayed decisions and avoided commitments. Wealth remained, but confidence did not. The protection that once surrounded the family showed its limits when uncertainty entered the room. The children felt the shift in subtler ways. Schools requested meetings. Friends' parents became distant. Social circles tightened, and rumors filtered through guarded conversations. The family name, once a source of pride, turned into a source of tension. Inside the household, trust weakened. The absence of clear explanations created space for suspicion. Private arguments increased, fueled by fear rather than facts. Each family member processed the pressure differently, but none were untouched by it. Legal teams moved in and out of the home, carrying files that were never discussed openly. The illness at the center of the leak remained unnamed, yet its shadow hung over every conversation. Avoiding the truth no longer kept it contained. As weeks passed, the family realized the damage could not be reversed quietly. Containment had failed. The silence that once protected their world now amplified every unanswered question. By the time the first international outlet prepared to publish, the family was already fractured. The scandal had not yet gone public, but its impact was undeniable. What had begun as a private effort to control information was turning into a crisis that wealth alone could no longer manage. When the story finally broke, it did not arrive as a rumor, but as a carefully constructed investigation. International headlines focused on patterns of secrecy, medical risk, and the misuse of power. The Sheikh's name appeared alongside timelines and verified records, leaving little room for denial. What had been whispered behind closed doors was now visible to the world. Social media accelerated the fallout. The story spread across platforms in multiple languages, reaching audiences far beyond the region where influence once controlled outcomes. Public sympathy shifted quickly toward the unnamed woman at the center of the case. Her anonymity became symbolic, representing many others who had been silenced by unequal power. Official responses followed predictable paths. Statements were released that avoided specifics, emphasizing privacy and legal boundaries. Threats of defamation lawsuits circulated, but they failed to slow the momentum. Each attempt to suppress the story only increased interest, drawing attention to what was being avoided rather than addressed. Health experts weighed in, reframing the narrative from scandal to responsibility. The focus moved away from personal behavior and toward accountability and risk. That shift proved devastating. It stripped away moral distractions and placed consequences at the center of public debate. Charitable organizations severed ties. Business partners froze deals. Properties associated with the Sheikh faced scrutiny. The image of stability he had built over decades began to collapse in real time. Silence, once a tool of control, became evidence of guilt in the public eye. Governments outside the region requested information. Investigations expanded across borders, making quiet resolutions impossible. The story was no longer local, and neither were the consequences. As the storm intensified, one truth became unavoidable. Power could delay exposure, but it could not erase it. The narrative had escaped containment, and no amount of influence could force it back into the shadows. Within days of the public storm, Maria disappeared without a trace. She left her Dubai apartment quietly, taking only what she could carry and avoiding any official notice. Flights were booked under different names, digital footprints were minimized, and her movements were carefully layered with decoys. Every step seemed calculated to erase the path she had traveled, leaving no link back to the woman who had shattered a dynasty's facade. Speculation ran rampant. Some believed she had fled to Europe, taking advantage of countries with strong privacy protections and lenient entry rules. Others suggested she had returned to the Philippines, vanishing into familiar networks that could protect her. Stories circulated among journalists and social media circles, but no confirmations emerged. The uncertainty added to the intrigue, making her disappearance almost as powerful as the revelations she had unleashed. Those who had tried to find her encountered dead ends. Hotels, rental agencies, and transit systems offered no records. Intermediaries who might have known her plans remained silent, either out of fear or loyalty. She had learned from experience that power worked both ways. The same networks that protected the Sheikh could hide her when she needed it. Her disappearance intensified the scandal. With the central figure now absent, speculation filled every gap. Experts debated motives and methods. Journalists followed shadowy trails, and public fascination only deepened. The mystery of her location became inseparable from the story itself. Yet for Maria, disappearance was not merely escape, it was strategy. By removing herself from view, she maintained control over the narrative in a way she could not have done publicly. She had struck, and now she was untouchable, operating in silence. In the absence of her presence, the chaos she had caused continued to unfold, proving that sometimes the most powerful influence comes from being unseen. The aftermath of the scandal left the Sheikh's empire in a state of quiet collapse. Public outrage and international scrutiny had eroded the trust that had once underpinned his businesses. Investors paused or withdrew entirely, partnerships dissolved, and contracts were renegotiated under intense pressure. Wealth remained, but confidence had vanished. Deals that once flowed smoothly now faced skepticism and legal obstacles, threatening the stability of ventures built over decades. Within the family, the damage was even deeper. Relationships that had seemed unshakable began to fracture under the weight of suspicion and blame. Spouses argued in private, advisors whispered about mistakes, and children struggled to understand the sudden withdrawal from the world they had known. Isolation, once a protective bubble, now amplified every fear. Trust, the foundation of the household, crumbled in silence. Media coverage intensified, keeping the scandal alive in public consciousness long after the initial revelations. International investigations probed business operations, medical records, and financial networks. The Sheikh's reputation, once untouchable, now faced relentless examination. Every misstep or delay became evidence in the court of public opinion. Even allies outside the family grew distant. Charities and social organizations severed ties, unwilling to risk association. Influential figures who had once offered support quietly moved away. The protection that money and status had afforded him proved fragile when reputation turned into liability. Amid the chaos, one truth was undeniable. The system that had shielded him from accountability could not protect him forever. Wealth delayed consequences, but it could not erase the impact of exposure. His carefully curated image had been shattered, leaving only a fractured household, weakened alliances, and a legacy tarnished beyond repair. The scandal was no longer a story about a single moment. It was the unraveling of a dynasty, initiated by someone who had quietly reclaimed control and chosen to remain unseen. Years passed, and Maria's story remained unresolved, leaving a void filled by speculation and rumor. Some claimed she had settled in Europe under a new identity, living quietly in coastal towns far from the influence and scrutiny that had defined her life in Dubai. Others suggested she had returned to the Philippines, blending into familiar neighborhoods and communities that offered protection and anonymity. No official record confirmed her location, and she seemed to exist only in the echoes of the scandal she had ignited. Despite her absence, the impact of her actions continued to ripple outward. The Sheikh's family remained fractured, his empire reduced to cautious operations, and his public image permanently tarnished. Legal investigations and media attention never fully dissipated, and the lessons of secrecy and power imbalance became case studies in international journalism and corporate ethics. Her influence persisted not through presence, but through the undeniable consequences she had set in motion. For Maria, the years of disappearance were not idle. She maintained careful routines, medical treatments, and safeguards that ensured her safety while avoiding detection. Each day was measured and deliberate, balancing health, anonymity, and the quiet satisfaction of having reclaimed control. In a life once defined by obedience and vulnerability, she had created a space where she could exist on her own terms. The story of her revenge became part of global discourse on power, privacy, and accountability. Scholars, journalists, and social commentators examined the sequence of events, noting how one person, previously powerless in the face of privilege, had disrupted a dynasty with precision and foresight. In the end, Maria's life was proof of quiet resilience. She had vanished physically, but her actions left an indelible mark. One woman, once invisible, had rewritten the rules around influence and secrecy. Her story was a reminder that sometimes the most profound power comes not from wealth or status, but from the courage to act when no one expects it.